Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at the camera setup on brand new Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra. S20 Ultra has some very impressive specs when it comes to both stills and video. Just like with other recent high-end smartphones, the camera setup is one of the main highlights of Samsung's latest flagship. In this video we will try to find out whether 108 megapixel camera makes sense in a smartphone, how useful is the zoom functionality, and whether the 8K video on a smartphone is a real deal or just a gimmick. Besides that, I will also go over the usual stuff such as out-of-camera processing, ultra-wide lens, and so on. Before we get to the image quality and actual performance, let's take a look at some physical aspects. What interests me personally the most about this camera setup is 1/1.33 inch size of the main sensor. Computing photography definitely has its limits, and if you want to move up, you just have to use larger sensor and better optics at some point. Associated with that is one disadvantage, at least for me personally. At the moment, you can only have this camera set up in very large 6.9 inch phablet. I would love to have it in 5.8 inch smartphone, but that is probably not possible at the moment. The camera bump is quite substantial, but not out of proportions in my opinion. The main camera uses new ISOCELL Bright HMX 108 megapixel 1/1.33 inch sensor and about 26mm full-frame equivalent lens. This is the largest sensor that is currently being used in a smartphone. By default, it combines 9 pixels together and takes 12 megapixel shots. That works really well. In this mode, the pixel density is pretty low, so the camera can capture a lot of actual details. So how about that 108 megapixel mode? To my surprise, it makes a massive difference in terms of the details. It seems that this lens can render significantly more than just 12 megapixels. It indeed shoots the most detailed stills that I've ever seen from a smartphone, so surprisingly, 108 megapixel mode is a real deal. S20 Ultra can also shoot RAWs in the native app, of course. I have to say that the RAWs are very impressive. The dynamic range is very solid, not just for a smartphone. You can recover a lot of information from both highlights and shadows. It provides a lot of flexibility and you can push it surprisingly far before it starts breaking down. Unfortunately, the RAWs are not available in 108 megapixel mode, which is a shame. I would really like to see those without in-camera processing. Also worth mentioning is that this is relatively large sensor with f1.8 lens, which means that it can naturally blur the background. I generally like that, but in some specific situations, the depth of field might not be sufficient, but I don't think that it will be a major concern. Overall, I can say that this sensor is class above every other camera that I've ever tested in a smartphone. The stills quality is outstanding, especially if you shoot RAWs. The telephoto lens has actual 4x optical zoom and it can use sensor cropping up to 100 times. I would say that the image quality is very good up to 5x. 10x is suitable for social media and so on. Personally, I wouldn't use more than 10x zoom. It is a good feature, it definitely increases the versatility of the whole camera setup and I actually like it a lot. The ultra-wide lens is the least interesting here. As usually, the image quality is the weakest on that one. It shoots pretty standard 12 megapixel smartphone ultra-wide shots. The field of view matches about 13mm full-frame equivalent, so you can always fit a lot of stuff in the frame. These stills are definitely usable for low-end publishing and they can make up for that image quality by providing dramatic field of view. I'm definitely glad to have an ultra-wide camera on any smartphone. Regarding the out-of-camera processing, as expected, that is quite aggressive. There is a ton of oversharpening, which is the case with vast majority of consumer devices. The colors are very vibrant and highly saturated as well, and the contrast is really high. It may sound like I'm complaining, but it actually works well for lower-end social media publishing. I acknowledge that this is what consumers prefer, and ultimately, majority of people will like this overkill processing. Advanced users can use Pro mode and edit really good RAW files. HDR functionality also works very well, so I'm generally happy with the whole processing. So how about the video? Let's address that 8K first. I will say right away that unlike the 108 megapixel stills mode, the 8K is just a gimmick and a disappointment. First of all, there is a huge crop and the stabilization is pretty bad in 8K. There is some additional detail over 4K video, but that aggressive processing and sharpening just kills it most of the time. There is no real reason to use it, and that is all that I have to say about the 8K. The 4K video looks good for a smartphone, but I can't really say that it is excellent. Just like with the full-frame cameras, when you use super high-resolution sensor, you have to sacrifice video quality because of the processing requirements. That is why 24 megapixel Panasonic S1 is better video camera than 47 megapixel Panasonic S1R. The video from all three cameras is completely fine for social media and consumer use. You can also use Filmic Pro to bypass that sharpening and do that yourself in post-production, which helps a lot, but the image quality can't compete with proper cameras or even some other consumer devices. I am personally okay with that. I am aware that it is the price for excellent stills quality, so I can accept that. Ultra-wide video and the video from telephoto lens actually has similar image quality. It is good for a smartphone, definitely usable, but not mind-blowing. The autofocus on the main camera is okay in my opinion. I haven't had any issues in the real-world use. In extreme situations, when focusing from close distance to infinity, it might be just a bit slower than the iPhone, for example, but it is definitely more than good enough for all-round use. On the ultra-wide camera, everything is in focus all the time because of the depth of field, so the autofocus is obviously not a problem there. On the telephoto lens, I have had some issues with the autofocus. Again, in realistic real-world situations, it won't be an issue. Overall, the autofocus is in my opinion fine, it has been improved by firmware update, and it works really well overall. The image stabilization is very good, or maybe even great on the main camera. I was genuinely surprised how well it can smooth out the walking. It is more than sufficient for static shots and panning. It is also very important for 108 megapixel mode, where you can easily see the shaking. It is also very good on the ultra-wide camera. That one is pretty easy to stabilize digitally. Here again, even the walking looks good. On the telephoto camera, it depends on the zoom. For video, I would use it handheld, maybe up to about 4 times zoom. The night mode also works pretty well. On the main camera, it can provide results usable for most types of digital publishing. In combination with that large sensor, the images are relatively clean in lower dynamic range scenes, unless you are shooting in complete darkness. On the ultra-wide and telephoto cameras, it is not that great, which is to be expected. The camera app is traditionally a strength of Samsung smartphones. The interface is easy to navigate and all of the settings are easy to find. I like how you can customize the modes and move them around. The Pro mode is really good. Here you have all of the manual settings and it is the only mode where you can shoot RAWs. A downside is that you can only use Pro mode with the main camera. There is also Pro video mode where you can use manual video settings. If you are serious about the video, I still recommend using Filmic Pro. That still provides the highest bitrate, and importantly, it allows you to turn off the internal sharpening. Unfortunately, Samsung won't let us shoot 8K or use telephoto lens in Filmic Pro. That is a real shame. The night mode is also separate, unlike on the iPhones, which is probably what I prefer. The front-facing camera has huge 40 megapixel resolution, which is completely unnecessary in my opinion. The angle is also very narrow for a selfie camera, so I would be happy to trade those megapixels for wider lens. Regarding some of the stuff that indirectly affects the shooting experience, First of all, I have to mention the screen. That is really excellent. It is 6.9-inch dynamic AMOLED screen with 541 ppi, very good brightness, HDR10 plus capabilities, and so on. Using this screen for anything is a pure joy, and that includes the photography and videography as well, of course. A big advantage over the iPhone is USB-C port and micro SD card slot. I still prefer taking out the SD card and using the card reader for a larger amount of files. For me, it is just more convenient than using the iPhone way. It is also a very cheap way to increase the storage space, although the SD cards are quite slow compared to internal memory. The battery life on this Exynos version is a disappointment for me. It is okay, it will last full day of usage, but I expected much more from 5000 mAh battery. So far, it is far from matching my iPhone 11 Pro with 3000 mAh battery. To sum up, I can say that I am happy with the camera setup on S20 Ultra, but there is a room for improvement. What I like the most is the main camera. It shoots the best stills that I've ever seen from any smartphone. Surprisingly, 108 megapixel mode makes a huge difference in terms of the details, and it is a real deal. Ultra-wide camera is okay, comparable with other high-end smartphones, so no complaints here. On the other hand, the video is okay, but nothing special to be honest. The 8K mode is not very useful, and I would generally say that it is a gimmick. The zoom functionality is nice, but I would be just fine with normal 50-ish mm lens. Overall, I can say that the main sensor really pushes this camera setup closer to certain types of proper cameras. I am personally very interested to see how close it can get to 1-inch sensor cameras, or maybe even something larger, so I will make a separate video about that. Of course, iPhone 11 Pro is still the main benchmark for smartphone cameras, so I will also make this comparison soon. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.